Welcome to a triple play fantasy in 15. I'm your host, Doc. I got Kevin DuBois underscore 22 with me. And we're talking in some fantasy football here. Now, we all know Travis Kelce is the number one tight end going off the board. But who you got number two? Darren Waller or George Kittle? You can't go wrong with either of these, but I'm here to take Kevin down in a debate today and tell why George Kittle's number two. But I want to be respectful of my guest, and I'll let Kevin open with why he thinks Darren Waller should be the number two tight end off the board.
Yeah, I know. So I think they're very close. And according to 444 ADP, they're literally going back to back. Kittle's going right ahead of Waller. And I've seen some drafts where Waller's gone there. I would just say that I think Waller's a safer play just because of the unknowns going on with San Francisco. So you have Lance or Jimmy G. You have a lot better weapons on the San Francisco 49ers, so that's going to disperse targets, whereas Waller is going to get those targets. Last year, he had 145 targets. He averaged 17.4 fantasy points per game. He was a cheat code. And I think the stat that I like the most when I talk about Waller is he would have been wide receiver 5 last year. So he would have been right behind DeAndre Hopkins in terms of stats. So that's just the cheat code that you see. I think he's still going to get those targets. I didn't see the Raiders upgrade at all. So when you look at their roster, John Brown coming in there, Ruggs is being there. Brian Edwards, who knows if he's going to actually break out or do anything. I know my analytics guys like that. So you can see 145 targets again. I really feel like you can see that number. He had 9 touchdowns last year. Carr likes him. I think that he's going to be a vocal point. So I just think that Kittle has to compete with more. And to be quite honest, Kittle's got to stay healthy. And I think Waller has shown that he's been able to stay healthy the last 2 seasons with Oakland. He's played every game but one. So I think he's a more consistent option. I can't believe I'm saying this. And I know you're a 49er fan, so you're going to think you're going to be a little biased. But I think Waller is the safer play.
So I want to touch on a couple points because they did bring in John Brown, who's a home run threat. They did take Henry Ruggs in the first round last year, and Brian Edwards is getting some buzz. Last year, Derek Carr had 517 pass attempts, which was 15th in the NFL. The 49ers had a carousel at quarterback. Nick Mullins led with 326, Jimmy Garoppolo with 140. One of George Kittle's injuries was a high ankle sprain, which Jimmy G overthrew him on a bubble pass. So I kind of contribute that to bad quarterback play. I think that's kind of an injury that you can deem a little bit fluke. For George Kittle, in the 7 full games he played last year, he had 5+ targets in all of them. The game against Philly, he caught 15 out of 15 targets thrown, or 15 targets were thrown his way, and he caught all of them. In 2019, when he was healthy every single game, he had 5+ targets in every game but 2, except for week 2 in a blowout versus Cincinnati. And then versus the Ravens, week 12, when it was a muddy game, and I know that because I was in attendance. Last year, he caught 79.4% of his balls thrown his way. In 2019, that was 76.2. I look at Darren Waller, who's more in the 72 to 73 range. A little bit of a small difference. But I think one of the things with Kittle that's been holding him back is he hasn't had that huge surge in touchdowns. He's had 2, 5, 5, and 2 in his 4 years in the league. Now, we've seen his ceiling. In 2018, he had 1,377 receiving yards, which is more than Waller has ever had. Waller has had 1,196. So the ceiling for Kittle, based on career-wise, is a little bit higher. But once again, I think that recency bias kicks in. I love the 49ers scheme better. I actually think with Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, they can't double Kittle like they used to. And one of the things about Kittle, and I think we can both agree on this, Kevin, he's the best blocking tight end in the league. So the 49ers line him up on the line a bunch. So you don't know whether he's going to block or whether you're going to double him. Whereas opposed to the Raiders, if you're saying, hey, look, the other receiving options suck, Darren Waller lines up out wide every single play. So you know that he's running a pass. So I think the scheme for the 49ers will allow Kittle to get open more.
Okay, that's fair. I would say this. Kittle's he's never scored more than 5 touchdowns this season. So even though he, like you said, he had 1,300 yards and he had 1,000 and extra in 2019, he still only scored 5 touchdowns that year. They're a run-heavy offense, and they don't really target him in the red zone as they did with Waller. Whereas if you look at Waller, he's had 9 and 3. He had 3 in 2019, but he had 9 last year. So you could say maybe he regresses a little bit, but that's their main target in the red zone. As to where the Niners are, they're going to have Ayuk. They have Deebo. And you know how Debo is, you know how good he is in the red zone. I think they're going to use him a lot more in reverses, kind of like how they use Tyreek Hill in Kansas City. So I do think that I'm going to look for a high upside in the touchdown part. So the touchdowns for me, I think Waller's going to score more touchdowns than Kittle. I agree, though. Kittle is the best blocker. I think overall, I think he's the better talent. I just think from a fantasy perspective, Waller brings a lot more to your fantasy teams because I think that he has a safer floor. And because I just don't like those weapons. You literally just said John Brown. Listen, John Brown's okay, but there's a reason why John Brown has played on how many teams has he played on? He can't stay healthy. He's not going to be Nelson Aguilar. Like he'll be all right. I don't believe in Ruggs as much, but I think that he'll be a little bit better this year. I just think it's going to be Waller, and Carr's being there is just going to pepper him. But I mean, it really comes down to this. Do you think Jimmy's going to start, or do you think Trey Lance is going to start? And when do you see that switch? Because you just said his bad quarterback play for why he got hurt, but everybody says that Jimmy G is going to go. I'm not one of those guys. I think Lance is going to start very early. But as a Niner fan, you might be more in tune with that because if Lance is going to start early, that might sway me a little bit with Kittle. But if it's Jimmy, man, I'm out.
So here's one of the things. When Jimmy started in 2018, that's when George Kittle had the 1,377 receiving yards. The 49ers locked up Trent Williams and they signed Alex Mack. I think that's their first thing, is really building with the line. But I think they drafted Trey Lance to get out of this run-heavy approach because when they were winning games and you have a lead, that's easy to bleed the clock. But Jimmy wasn't able to come from behind and lead us back to victories, as evidenced what we saw in the Super Bowl with the Chiefs. So I think the 49ers are going to actually transition from the run-heavy team we've seen to a more pass-heavy team. Jeff Wilson is already going to start the season off on the IR, which means you have Raheem Mostert, Wayne Gallman, Trey Sermon in the mix. Now, speaking of offensive line, that's going to be a huge issue for the Raiders. The Raiders essentially got rid of their entire offensive line, and they spent their entire draft on defense besides an offensive lineman in the first round. And I think game script is really what helped Darren Waller last year. The Raiders allowed 29.9 points per game, which was 30th in the NFL. They spent a second-round pick on Trayvon Moehrig from TCU, the safety. They spent a third-round pick on a cornerback. It's interesting. They spent another third-round pick on a safety, a fourth-round pick on a safety, and a fifth-round pick on a cornerback. So they're really trying to assure that secondary. But I think we see the Raiders' defense improve a little bit, which I think is a less favorable game script for Derek Carr and the Raiders. I think a lot of times we see that they'd lose, a 44-38 shootout where it's really they just needed to come back, and Darren Waller was getting garbage time points, which are still relevant, but I don't think that's something you can bank on year to year.
Yeah, I would say that that's a tough division, though, right? So they're going to be playing the Mahomes. That's going to be a shootout, and they've actually played pretty well against the Chiefs. If we know that, I think that'll be a shootout. Honestly, they drafted defensive players, but Mike Mayock has never been a guy that actually knows what talent looks like. Let's
that's something we can both agree on.
Let's be honest there. Chargers are going to have a great offense. They got Herbert there. Denver, who knows if they maybe get Rodgers, maybe that changes. But I still think in that division they're going to have to score a lot of points. But to your credit, if he hits on those draft picks, which in my opinion is unlikely. I like Moehrig, though. I want him to go to Cowboys in the second. So I do like him as a safety. They still need help with those corners. I still think their defensive line is suspect. So I do think game script is kind of overshadowed, but that offensive line is a real thing. You're 100% correct. That offensive line, but I could also flip it to you with the Niners. Your guys' defense should be top 10 in the league next year. If you stay healthy, you guys have a legitimate defense. You have a power run game. Those game scripts are going to be kind of flipped too, right? You're not going to see those shootouts. You're going to see ball control. If Lance is there, I think maybe it's a little different, but you guys are going to have one of the best defenses in the league on top of one of the best rushing attacks. As long as you guys stay healthy, that could limit Kittle as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. I think George Kittle is the primary focus in the offense. As much as I love Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel is very injury prone, and I think they're going to have him play in the slot a lot. And Brandon Ayuk was a beneficiary last year of everybody going down. I do think he is a talented receiver. I've seen a lot of people say, well, George Kittle got his stats when Pierre Garçon and Kendrick Bourne were the number 1 and number 2 wide receiver. Well, if anything, that's taking the attention away. As mentioned, you can't double Kittle anymore. The thing that really kind of was the dividing line, I like Kyle Shanahan's offensive scheme much more than Mike Mayock's or whoever is running the Raiders. Obviously Kyle Shanahan is 0-2 in Super Bowls, but he's had a creative enough offense to get him to that point. We've seen career years with Matt Ryan, which Jimmy Garoppolo. I trust a tight end in his system more. Both of these players are very talented. I don't think you're going to be mad if you get either one. They are the number 2 and 3 going off in the majority of picks. Let us know, who would you pick? Would you pick George Kittle and agree with the right person? Or would you pick Darren Waller and make a mistake? Let us know in the comments. We're going to release more of these videos, especially with draft season approaching. If there's any players you'd like to see us, please let us know. Follow us at Trip Play Fantasy, and we will see you next time.